Hello and welcome to the Green Outdoors podcast. My name's Kyle.
I'm Ryan.
I'm Jeff.
And I'm Sonja Christensen.
And Sonja is joining us today. Sonja, tell everyone who you are and what your title is.
Yep, so I'm Sonja Christensen. I'm an assistant professor in the Department of Fisheries and Wildlife at Michigan State University.
Awesome. Jeff's alma mater.
Mm-hmm.
Woohoo.
Yeah.
Did you ever graduate?
Yeah. I
Well done. Well done.
I did go to the graduation ceremony.
Yeah, you did.
His degrees in dietetics
Oh, cool.
really went a long way in this business. No, I'm just kidding.
I mean, I'm always, a little biased towards fisheries and wildlife, but that's
Sure.
okay. It's okay. It's still
If
change.
I could go back and do it again, I'd probably do something in fisheries and wildlife. now.
It's a lot of fun. We are pretty lucky, so.
It's cool that Michigan State is so close by, and it seems like there's a lot of research that goes into that department and stuff that we're interested in too. So it's nice to be able to have experts nearby. I want you to tell everyone a little bit about your background, what your PhD is in, and kind of why, and then I'll talk about why we brought you in.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I have actually been working on deer specifically for 20 years already. I started back when I was an undergrad with Minnesota DNR. I'm from a town called Bemidji, Minnesota. It's like way up north.
Okay.
Super cold, but really pretty area. Lots of beautiful wildlife there. Grew up fishing and everything. And then I went to Minnesota State in the southern part of the state, and then started with Minnesota DNR as an intern, and then like a paraprofessional in wildlife, specifically again deer stuff. Right from there, I did my master's degree out at Penn State. Also working on deer. I did my research actually in Maryland. So off the coast of Maryland, there's like the little barrier island called Assateague Island National Seashore. They have white-tailed deer on this little strip of island, and these introduced Sika deer, S-I-K-A, from Japan. They're just these little, full of personality elk, basically.
Yeah.
That were out competing the white-tailed deer there.
I like the sound they make, and they're pretty aggressive.
Yeah. They bite when you catch them.
Yeah. Oh, wow.
I'm serious.
She holds up 2 fingers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, so I was radio counting both those species at the time.
Yeah.
And, the roly-poly little Sika deer, they can like turn on you and kick, and they would try to bite, and they'd make all sorts of sounds. White-tailed deer, when you catch them for research and are putting a radio collar on them, you kind of just like, they're so like long and gangly. You just put their legs under them, and they'll just kind of stay down for you.
Yeah.
But yeah, those Sika deer were tricky. So.
Yeah, that's funny.
Yeah.
I've watched some content on Sika deer, in Michigan, or not Michigan, in the United States, where they've like have these little pockets of populations, and it's pretty interesting to see just the differences and how you call them in and that sort of thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
So when you say you've been dealing with deer for the last 20 years, specifically disease, correct?
Well, actually, I've gotten into the disease game more formally only in the last 10, 15 years.
Okay.
So just to finish out the story, Penn State, and then after Penn State, with my master's degree, I went to the state of Massachusetts, and I was there like Chad Stewart, or their program leader for deer program, and moose. They have moose in Massachusetts for about just under 4 years. And then I decided to go back to academia. So then I decided to go back and get a PhD after that experience. And so, yeah, I was doing all things deer for the state of Massachusetts, their state agency, Mass Wildlife. It was a great experience, great people there. And it's a small agency, so I had to wear all the hats. Like, I did the disease program, I did the permitting programs, I did the antlerless allocation program statewide, I did all that stuff. And then back to academia, decided I wanted to be more on the research end of things, because I could try to help deal with some of the challenging problems that kept coming up as a deer manager all the time. And then specifically, I was really interested in disease because we were starting to look for CWD more at the time. We were a border state to New York State that had found it in 2005 and hadn't found it again. And I decided to go in that direction. So I did a little bit of work in Montana for a few years on elk. Then I ended up coming here through the Boone and Crockett Endowed Chair Program. The former endowed chair, unfortunately, he's passed away, Dr. Bill Porter, was my advisor here. So I did my PhD at Michigan State University with him, then stayed on, did my postdoc, stayed on further as assistant professor in our department. It's a great place, so I couldn't leave.
You talked about the department in Massachusetts specifically kind of wearing all the different hats.
Yeah.
Did you see a big difference between Minnesota, Michigan, and Massachusetts as far as funding or the way you're perceived or the way your department's in, where it felt less or more important to different people in each state? Like, what was the dynamic there?
So that's a great question, and that could be a whole episode.
Yeah.
So deer hunters, you can always connect with deer hunters. We're all deer hunters,
Sure.
right? And deer hunters are everywhere. That thing's consistent. How many deer hunters there are, how loud their voices are in different states.
Sure.
That changes. Minnesota, big deer hunting community I grew up in for sure. My grandfather hunted, a lot of our family friends did. But Minnesota's a little unique because they have really good funding through, I won't get it all right, and you could ask some of my colleagues at Minnesota DNR, but they have funds that are more available for things like research and other things in Minnesota because they have a little bit different funding model where it's not just directly license sales and Pittman Robertson funds like other places, other state agencies. So that funding source, similar to actually the states of Missouri and Arkansas, have some dedicated funding for wildlife conservation research
Sure.
and management. So I got to do a lot of cool research there, even as just starting out my career. Massachusetts was interesting because relative to the 7 million people that live in that small state, hunters were a pretty small minority.
Sure.
One of the interesting things I found working with hunters in Massachusetts, there were a lot of, I'd say, coalitions with our sportsmen and women and others that you don't always find everywhere, like with Mass Audubon, with a bunch of non-hunting organizations that aren't maybe traditional partners you think of, but man, when you're left in a room thinking, wow, well, we all still care about wild spaces and wild animals and healthy environments. Let's be partners because there's a lot more in the state that aren't even thinking about this. So those partnerships were super important. And I'd say, unfortunately, you guys probably know, total numbers of hunters is declining over time. And I do think in general, we're going to be looking to, find new partners and realize that, worrying about this, that, and the other exact perfect regulation, that's fine. But, let's put maybe our energy towards building some coalitions of partnerships where we're saving good habitat and good wildlife management practices and good space to keep some of these public access resources and such available for everybody.
You kind of hit on something there too, where you're saying we could put all of our focus into these different things, but what if we all put our energy into the overall big picture thing? It would be impossible not to know. If you're in the hunting or fishing industry at all, you know that there's two sides often. Now, the sides don't follow the same narrative. There's two sides to issues of whether or not you should use a 28 gauge or a 12 gauge, or there's different.
Pick anything.
Yeah, there's different sides like that. But then on the other side, there's different sides as far as, I hate to say it too, I almost say it's almost a little bit COVID-y, where there's definitely two sides when it comes to COVID. When people talk about it, right? There's two sides, and one side still wearing a mask today by themselves in the car, and the other side is, wouldn't wear it when you needed to, and it's and everywhere.
Both think that the other is dumb.
Yeah.
So with that, I've always tried to encourage more people to get involved and also hear their voices heard. So the whole point of our show from day one, 9 years ago, was to inspire the next generation to get into hunting and fishing because we saw the decline. 60% in Michigan, hunting and fishing licenses sold to white males over the age of 55.
Yep.
If we don't replace that demographic in the next 10 years, we're going to lose 60% of the funding. Yep. And it's no joke, and it's coming, and I've been sounding that alarm. I used to say 20 years. Now I got to say 10.
Yeah.
It's a little bit, it's getting scarier and weirder. And not only, though, and this was something Ted Nugent told me, too, when I was young, he said, you can... Because the whole thing for me was I want to sell hunting and fishing licenses. He's like, do that. But also make sure your voice is heard and that you're holding people accountable, that things make sense. Because in any government and any agency and anything, things can go one way or the other, and then we can kind of get off of the beaten path of what makes sense. I was working with... I've had the honor of meeting so many different Department of Natural Resources and Fish and Game folks across the country. And... we had a really great experience with Idaho. And what we witnessed was, while we were there, we were ice fishing. So we were it's called Henry's Lake, and it was used as our controlled group, but there's cutthroat trout there, native Yellowstone cutthroat trout. And then they would take some of those fish and then put them in remote lakes that are fishless in the mountains. And what that kind of does is it gives anglers new opportunities, but also you're like moving the fish around so they're not all in one area.
Yeah.
So that if something happens, we don't lose that fish, right? And while we were there, there's people going out on the ice, and I was seeing the interactions between the Fish and Game there and the people that were going on the ice, whether they were coming off with fish or whatever. And it was like the happiest interactions you've ever heard.
Well, they're ice fishing.
Yeah, of course.
Great.
Can't beat it. That's Minnesota and Michigan. You know what it's like to be cold, so you got it handled. And seeing those genuine, awesome interactions, and that really pumped me up because I was like, man, you guys, that doesn't happen in Michigan. We have a very, very hostile relationship right now between the people and the DNR, which I don't want. You know what I mean? I don't want that. And I asked Brad, I said, why do you think that is? He said that typically when you have a Department of Natural Resources or Fish and Game Agency made up of mostly biologists, you get this relationship. When you have one made up mostly of police force, you have this other relationship where things kind of get carried away. And that was one of the reasons why we wanted to bring you in as an expert on the science of it, especially with deer disease, which tends to be one of the more controversial or anger-driven topics. Both sides think the other side is stupid. And we have witnessed that, and I don't even think I'll have to express any of my opinions in this because I don't want to put opinion out there. Instead, I'd like to almost get your expertise on like what you're seeing on the ground floor. Yeah. So that can help shape me and the audience in kind of what we're thinking.
They get enough of our opinions.
No, so one of the things that I don't know whether what would make the most sense for you. I know that you said you don't want to hit on TB too much, so I'll do a little bit of a background on TB in Michigan, and then we'll kind of move off that quick because I think it's one of the diseases that kind of started the panic for a lot of people. Like TB, for the sake of it in Michigan, was like, hey, something could happen to all our deer. You know, that people were saying that, and we have what's called a TB zone in Michigan. Yep. And it started out where they were aware that it was taking place, and they started studying it. And for about an 8-year period, I want to say it was like 95 to 2003, but don't quote me on that, is in that realm. They did a study on it, but didn't really introduce new laws. And then a bait ban was put in place there in 2003 that carried through to now. And that has given us a lot of data of, 15 years without bait, 8 years with bait. And that was a point that I've often made is you can kind of track those numbers and see the difference that the bait ban had in those places, which was nothing. Actually, it was the average was 1.7% with bait as far as infection rate for the first 8 years, and then it averages to be exactly the same number without bait. So we're not seeing a difference between the 8 years without and the 15 or 20 years with. Reverse that, 8 years with bait, and then the 10 or 15 years without. So that one kind of tends to be a little bit controversial in the sense of there's a lot of people that believe the bait ban should be lifted. There's a lot of people that want to keep it in place because they're like, hey, let's not rock the boat. Let's control what we can control.
Yeah. So I don't mind talking about TB at all.
Yeah. That's just not your thing.
Well,
yeah.
I just have so many good, smart colleagues who do that more than I do. And
sure.
I think about it a lot, and I'm certainly very familiar with it in Michigan because of the history in Michigan with TB, of course. But it's a tricky one. I would say that's an interesting example. It's tough, though. So as an ecologist and a scientist, I would love if we had this nice, like, bimodal experiment of bait and non-bait. Unfortunately, it's so messy.
So many variables.
There's that's interesting. I think it's cool that you looked into that, but I would also be looking at a lot of other things that are going on, and maybe it wasn't that, like, you would almost need another control site to say, what if we, like, put a, didn't step on the brakes or, put on the gas or whatever relative to bait or not bait. Would that then look different in that other, like, that subsequent time? That would help us better understand.
Is there something at that 8-year mark, or was there a different variable that also contributed to it not spreading more? Therefore,
like they were pushing something else harder over here, which, and so there's usually a lot of factors that go into trying to reduce risk, and a lot of times it's a numbers game and it's a lot of trade-offs because there's a lot of different pieces of the puzzle.
There's never really control when you're dealing with wild animals.
Oh, exactly. I mean, oh my gosh.
Ever.
For
And don't own
disease
chimps.
stuff, yeah. I mean,
They'll eventually eat your face.
yeah. So for wildlife stuff, a lot of our colleagues, like I'm not a veterinarian. I've got a PhD. I do my work like in the field, radio collaring animals or tracking animals, using camera traps, using all sorts of methods to look at wild animals. But those studies are quite expensive, and to do a really good job, you're really like monitoring these animals for a long time,
Right.
And with a lot of like really specialized equipment, it's really challenging.
It's expensive too.
It's super expensive. It's hard because a lot of folks don't realize how expensive good research is, and it seems like such a huge investment. But then
I think it's also people don't know how to do it, right? So it's like they just don't
expertise that is needed.
Exactly. Like sometimes something will cost so much money and you'll be like, how? It's just a piece of plastic. It's like, well, what went into it?
Yeah.
You tried to catch a deer before?
Right.
Oh man,
they don't like it.
Well, no, I remember the first time I caught a deer, and I was told to go in what's called a clover trap, and it was sort of just like get in there, and it wasn't sedated or immobilized. It was just,
Clover trap.
Yeah, the old CT. So to get in there, and I got in there and wrestled that deer down. It was
Nice.
fun.
Wow.
Well, with some help from my
She
other
pulled up her
technician.
sleeve.
Yeah.
She goes, here's a scar.
It was a couple fingers lost, right? But no. So anyway, in those cases, in these free ranging systems, I would just often encourage people to think like these are pretty complex things going on.
Sure.
There's hunters, there's farmers, there's different land areas, there's different regulations, and all of these different factors that are kind of contributing. And again, you have to sort of try to minimize all the risk factors you possibly can to try to reduce spread and growth of a disease as much as you can. And TB compared to chronic wasting disease, CWD, compared to Epizootic Hemorrhagic Disease, EHD.
She said it. She said the Worcestershire sauce.
Yeah.
I'm usually the one that has to say that, and I end up going, Epizootic Hemorrhagic Disease.
Yeah. I mean, it's kind
Who's
of
naming these?
I know. It's like alphabet soup, too. And, then you'll just hear people say EHD, CWD, blah, blah, blah. So they are all so different, too. All their risk factors are a bit different. TB is zoonotic. The other two aren't. Zoonotic meaning that humans can get tuberculosis. That's pretty scary. There's import regulations and export regulations to livestock due to tuberculosis.
Sure.
Not EHD or CWD. There's different economic consequences. Like all of these different things affect our ability to manage these diseases and understand them. So,
do we know, we're moving on to CWD, I guess we'll kind of start it there, is do we know how it originated in our deer herd or elk herd?
In Michigan or?
In general.
So I don't think any one person knows.
Okay.
That's my take. It originated in the Fort Collins area of Colorado in the 60s. It was described by some great research biologists out there who are experts at prion biology and wildlife, and they were able to describe this prion, this misfolded protein that
is that what it actually is? It's just a misfolded protein?
Exactly. It's weird. It's like it's all screwed up, and proteins are difficult because they're not a virus or bacteria or fungi or something. We're all made of proteins, so you can't target it because you're just targeting other proteins, right? So how do you deal with that? It's super challenging, and it's similar to other transmissible spongiform encephalopathies like mad cow disease and scrapie, and it's a tricky one. It's like it doesn't go away, it can stay in the environment for years. It's super challenging.
One of the things I maintained from my dietetics degree was the human form, which is Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease.
Yeah, and there's variants.
It's just one of the random things that's just in my head.
Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease.
It made it in, and it's stuck in there like a prion, living in its unnatural environment for the next 20 years.
Well done, MSU.
Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah, so there's Creutzfeldt-Jakob is basically what you would see in humans if it were to be a thing. Although, it's really hard to diagnose things like that. Like, is it Alzheimer's? I mean, for Creutzfeldt-Jakob, that's clearly there's pathogenesis and there's signs for that. The medical professionals know. But if CWD were to jump to humans, it would actually be really difficult to distinguish that, right?
And that's terrifying. Even just I hate the sentence even because I can't imagine what that would do to hunting and fishing.
Oh my gosh, and that's what we're all scared about, and we're already as wildlife managers and conservation folks worried about a decline in hunting, because that's the base of the funding model for so many other important wildlife and conservation actions that are happening for other species too. So,
and we've got a colossally big deer herd in Michigan, and on top of that, we have also had 2 very mild winters, back to back, and that's although this winter is supposed to be really good. I haven't got the ice fishing. Like,
I would love.
Yeah.
Oh, I'd like to go ice fishing too.
You like the ice fishing too?
I've grown up doing it. It's
nice.
like part of my life. So yeah, absolutely.
Tip ups?
So my setup
is
like, first of all, let's get things straight. You've got your brats going over here.
Oh yeah.
Beverage of choice over there, and then you I like to have a hole just for jigging.
Yeah.
Keep me occupied.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then I have my tip ups out then, and it's like a social sport because
Yep.
a tip up goes and everybody goes together.
Chaos to get out
and then pulling it out and whatever else. So it's like group mentality fishing, and it's so social. It's so fun.
I could not agree more. That's exactly our experience. How often did you run into lakes in Minnesota where you could see the fish? Because we have some lakes that are super clear.
Oh, okay.
Where you could see like 20, 30 foot down, you're jigging.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Sometimes, that's
everything to me. You get a clear lake, I'll take 5 fish in a clear lake over 20 fish in a cloudy lake.
You can see the whole action.
You're fishing in an aquarium.
Yeah.
Basically.
I feel like Minnesota's real cold, and so we were dealing with like a 1.5 feet of ice sometimes.
Wow.
1.5 feet of ice.
Yeah.
I was just like, you don't want the hand dogger for that.
Sure. Yeah, no.
Yeah.
Yeah, we've had it on Lake St. Clair. There was a morning where Jeff and I were walking out one time, and the ice was probably 5 inches thick, but it was crystal clear, and so was the water. So as you're walking out, you're like spooking fish.
That's
and
cool.
if you look down, it's you're like, all right, I need my balance back. I gotta look.
All of a sudden, you're hunting. Oh, okay.
Crazy. Yeah. Have you ever gone spearfishing?
Yes.
Like through the ice?
Yes. Yeah, that's a pretty special time too. And that's what I mean is like there's some lakes here in Michigan where you get clear water, and that's just like
that's
you see them come in and they're looking to decoy, your heart's racing. You're playing the ultimate claw machine game.
Yeah. Oh man, that's intense. Yeah. So I don't know. I feel like I remember there being a lot of ice, but I remember a lot of fishing growing up. I was the kid who would unfortunately though like be running around, because I've done this with my family forever. Like, and then I'd be running, playing, and then whoop, leg in a fish hole.
Yep.
Up to my hip. So
yeah. There was a spurt there where I couldn't remember a time we had gone ice fishing where I didn't fall through. Yeah. We were doing dumb stuff.
Well,
we were like wearing waders in anticipation, but we knew where the ice would be. Yeah, we're not the brightest crayon.
Quite a few times where you're going to come back with either a wet foot or without a phone.
I go with the wet foot over the lost phone, probably.
Well, unfortunately, he's old wet foot, and I'm Mr. Lost Phone. Yeah.
The worst is when it makes it to the bottom with the light still on.
Oh, and then you
can see it down there, but there's nothing you can do.
Texts are coming through.
Hey Siri,
float. Going back to CWD.
Yep.
So you're based on your circles and the people that you've encountered, is that you don't know where it came from. It's just that the scientists found it in Colorado. They were the originators of finding it.
Yeah. I don't know.
I heard a theory that I want to run by you, and you tell me if I'm right or wrong.
I won't be able to tell you if you're right or wrong. I'm a scientist. I have like caveats, and I can't say 100%.
Yeah, this isn't my opinion because I wasn't there. Yep. I also don't like when people say things as a matter of fact when they weren't there either. I don't like when you hear people say things like, there was voter fraud in the election. It's like, how do you know? How do you know your vote even counted? You went in and you put it in the machine, it did its thing. You don't actually know whether there was none. You don't know whether there was some. You don't actually know unless you're there. That's how I feel.
Now, if you saw a video, that doesn't matter either because of AI.
Yeah,
nothing's real anymore.
So
science helps.
Yes,
yeah. I will say that.
I preface this with that, but one of the things that I've heard from many people was that at one point in time they were doing a test to see if mad cow disease or scabies could actually transfer to deer herd. So they were injecting deer with massive amounts of it, like directly into their brain and things like that, to see if they get it. They turned out they did. Once the Colorado lab lost funding, instead of killing all the deer and elk, they just let them go.
So that part wouldn't ever fly with like any
That's what I
program, because like we have to do this thing called an IACUC, or basically animal care and use, and through universities. I mean, my goodness, you have to do all the paperwork and all the everything to make sure you have what we call a challenge study to be able to clinically or experimentally infect an animal with some new pathogen. That would be super highly regulated. And
Hashtag
you have
COVID.
you have to have a disposal plan, right? So, and you euthanize or put down those animals at a certain point, usually when they've gotten the disease, and then you're looking at every organ and every tissue to see, okay, how did this disease progress? It's a new thing, or how did this pathogen basically affect the host? That's
right.
how I'd say it. So, yeah, that would be very unlikely, and like a lot of things would have to have gone wrong for that to happen, I would think. But but there was a lot of scrapey research in that area. I know that, and again, there was a herd that they had there at Colorado State, and again, there's experts who would be able to tell you more detail. I wasn't there, and
right.
But I do know that we know that we started picking it up in free ranging cervids in Colorado first, Wyoming. Unfortunately, Wisconsin was really where that was a ground zero for the Midwest, and CWD is just it doesn't go away. It's slow disease. It's not a fast moving disease. It is not fast.
In the sense of spread or in the sense of infection?
Both.
Okay.
I'd say that's one of the biggest difference between like something like Epizootic Hemorrhagic Disease, EHD, versus CWD. EHD is fast, and it's not transmissible between deer. They can't give it to each other. They have to be bit by this little thing called a culicoides, or midge. The culicoides is a genus.
We call them noceums.
That's
is that the nocemes?
They're tiny.
They are the worst.
They're tiny, and
can't see them.
I know, they're the worst. They're the worst. They have to transmit the virus, and it is a virus for EHD, to the deer directly. They can't. Deer can't get it. And then once they get infected, it's like, after like 5 to 8 days, that deer is like viremic, which means it's like feeling it. It's feverish. It feels terrible. It's going to go hang up by water. It's hot usually and dry, and it's not doing well, and then it can die very quickly after. Sure. So that's like, maybe 10 days. CWD, think 18 months.
Wow.
2 years.
They can have no symptoms and just walk around.
Just walking around. And so because it's so slow, and then they're at that whole time they're giving it to each other, and they're shedding through saliva and feces and other materials more infectious prions in the landscape that stay infectious. So like this piece of dirt that this deer drooled on is that another deer comes by and interacts or like licks up something near there or eats some grass near there. That's infectious saliva can then infect that deer. They don't even have to be at the same place at the same time.
Right.
So that one is slow going. It's slower to infect or really affect an animal and really become a problem in an animal. But
what is the life cycle of it in an animal, or do we not know that?
Well, life cycle of it basically, and there's some variability, right? Like not every 2 deer are exactly the same, and there's lots of reasons for some of that variation.
Like the flu, some people get knocked out, some people don't.
Yeah, there's going to be variation, but they all get it. They can all get it, and they will all die from it once they get it. If they've been exposed to infectious prions, CWD prions, and those prions are in the animal, they will basically affect the neurology of the animal, the brain tissue itself. Think spongiform encephalopathy, spongy brain. Like it's like vacuoles or holes in the brain. So they start getting, Swiss cheese brain for deer.
For every purpose, for every path, for every soul, for every season, there's a ram.
We're not just another brand. We're pioneers of innovation, masters of accuracy. Gone are the days of your grandma's dusty old rifle. Face your future with a Savage.
The Greenway Outdoors is brought to you by Ram Trucks, built to serve. Bass Pro Shops and Cabela's, your adventure starts here. Savage Arms, Nosler Ammunition, Bosch Shot Shells, Wilderness Athlete, fuel for the rugged, Tracker Boats, fish the finest, Eagle Fishing, designed for the savvy angler, Rufus Teague Barbecues, Snacks, and Spices, Rectech Grills, it's more than a grill, it's a way of life. Sea-Doo, make your own waves. LEM Products, motivating people to hunt, process, and prepare their own food. Quiet Cat, the leader in electronic bikes for hunting, fishing, camping, and exploring.
Not healthy deer, their ears are down. That's always my first sign that a deer's not doing well. If its ears are kind of down and looking kind of mopey, it's lethargic but again, that's after months of having this prion and it's this infectious prion.
So it's a months thing because you said, I guess
months to years, up to 2 years.
So we know for a fact that every deer that gets CWD dies from it?
100%. We do know because clinical trials have been done time over time.
What does a clinical trial look like for something like this?
So you'll get facilities at University of Georgia or other places. There's also multiple places. Not a lot, actually. I wish there were more facilities that were able to do this level of research because it's actually hard to pull off because you need clean deer that aren't infected and have you have to prove that these little fawns come in and they don't have any of this stuff. And then they're raised in a trial setup, and there's replicates and controls. So somebody that are then given some sort of amount, a specific amount of infectious pathogen, like whether it's the prion or like some other disease or whatever you might be interested in. And then they're raised up, and then samples can be collected over time to see if they have they are then, I guess, infected by the disease or shedding prions, because we can detect prions, like infectious prions from saliva or from feces or other things while the animal's still alive.
So like a scanner at some point was like, there's some CWD in there.
Yeah, I wish there was a scanner. That would be awesome if there was a scanner. Unfortunately, the tests for this are also always being developed. For a long time, there was no test that you could do for a deer or elk that didn't require the animal to be dead. So usually we use lymph nodes or other tissues. Now there's more tests that are more sensitive for other tissues and such. So
do we know? So I guess going back is it's different for every animal, like you said, but I'm stuck on that. Every one of them dies from it. So is it like some of them it dies 7 years later?
That's not typically the case.
Okay, so what is the normal cycle?
Yep. I'd still say on average for most deer that you'll find out there and their genetic history and everything else, most of them will be like that 18 months to 2 years time period. You'll get maybe some rarer individuals in a free-ranging population where it's longer, but if they've been infected with infectious CWD.
So from time of infection, 2 years would be a normal.
Yeah.
Okay. What is the life expectancy of a deer in Michigan in general? Do we know that?
There's certainly been survival studies like where you radio collar a deer, free-ranging deer.
Yeah, you wonder how accurate though.
Yeah, they're not bad because there's a lot of care on the research end to make sure you're getting a representative population, and depending on your research question, are you looking at survival of all deer or just
bucks or
males
those? Yeah.
Whatever. So there's a lot of intention in making sure you have enough animal sample, that you have a good statistical sample, and you can make really good statements with the outcome. So, and survival analysis for deer has been done many, many times over. I mean, white-tailed deer are not understudied, I would say.
Yeah, I would agree.
I have a lot of colleagues in the wildlife world who are like, oh, another deer project.
Yeah.
Like, you don't know anything about them. I'm like, no, but they're still things,
Yeah.
So
I don't know why they scratch your ears. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah.
Clearly, that's where a lot of the money goes. So,
Yeah.
right?
Well, yeah. Well, and because we can get our hands on them, and because they are so important to our management and conservation of wildlife more generally, a lot of these things are really important because there's these emerging diseases that are challenging. We need to know more of how this is going to impact deer populations, right?
It kind of shows what a valuable resource it is.
It is. It's a hugely valuable resource. Totally.
So we do the study in a controlled setting where we infect the deer, and we see on average most of them will die within a couple years. And when you take them apart, are they having a heart attack? Are they having a stroke? Are they their brain gave out? Like, what is the...
So, yeah, you're going to see it in their lymph nodes and their...
She's like, actually, you'd be surprised, but it's suicide.
They're like, this terrible life. Yeah, living in a pen. And I will say, this is actually not... I'm not in a lab. I'm not usually... My particular area of research is not that piece of the puzzle. I collaborate with great people who do that specific piece of the puzzle, because I'm usually doing the field part or the statistical modeling part, that kind of stuff.
Sounds like more fun.
I like it. I like it outside. But yeah, so it's usually in the brain. Like, you're going to be looking in the brain. You're going to be looking in the lymph nodes. So again, the those tissues basically.
And you see that it's
spongy. Like it's like holes in the brain. Where there was brain matter, there are now holes.
So the brain matter eventually that would tell the body to keep living goes away.
Yes, and then
is it eating it?
No, it's
dissolving it.
It's just an infectious prion, and
It's
again,
just a protein, so it's not.
Yeah, I'm just wondering what makes it go away.
Dissolving it, it's like it's weird. And this is where I would say I can think of about 5 great prion biologists.
Sure,
who you should have on your show.
Sure. Okay,
but again, the outcome is the same every time.
Where's the rest of the cheese going? Is what I'm curious.
yeah. Well, yeah. So, it's a good question, but
one of the things that I have thought about several times since we've been talking about this is, so it transfers from deer to deer, but is it possible for it to it had to come from somewhere? Does it just spontaneously happen sometimes?
That's a very good question too. So in some places, so in Norway, there's been, I think in moose, some what they've called sporadic forms of the disease. Now, generally speaking, that's not what we see here in North America. So it's this transmission thing. And, we have to think of all the ways that infectious deer might transmit it to each other. And that's usually what I'm thinking about. I'm thinking about risk factors. All right, like, who's risky on the landscape in the deer population? What are risk factors that might be, that might be like worse for, and might be explaining why we're seeing it here rather than there. But yeah,
that's one of the things I thought was interesting was that I get U.S., Canada has it, they're right by each other, but like Norway has it, Finland has it.
Yeah, there's again, there's some different histories there of the disease, but and there has been like a sporadic form that's been described, but some of these it's interesting. And again, usually I'm more focused on the things that are transmissible. I'd say disease ecology and wildlife is like kind of a little mystery in general, where you're like, why did this happen here? And why didn't it happen then or over here or something else? So
all with a bunch of wild animals
that are not telling you that they're sick.
Yeah. I'm trying to phrase a question that I have. So we understand, I guess, do you think that there will be differences between the wild deer and how they respond to it based on the different stressors of life? What kind of concentration we think that they would actually pick up of the prion, whether they get it in the ground versus poop versus saliva versus getting it from their mom. Do we think that the control in the lab is a good representation of what would happen in the wild?
Yeah, because studies have been done on that.
I would think the wild would be worse off because they got more stressors.
Yeah,
it's
a good point. I mean, for sure, if immune systems are stressed, you're more likely to get infected by other things. So, and I think sometimes, like I'm studying EHD also, if I'm always curious about how our EHD and CWD interplaying with each other in a deer, and is one kind of giving more risk to the other, and maybe it had this, but it died from that. It's hard to figure that stuff out unless you're really looking carefully and closely and trying to pick it up. But yeah, I think there's been lots of studies where they're basically, the whole study is, let's give different variable doses along a gradient to an animal to see, what level really kicks off the disease. That's a study that's, again, hard to actually pull off with enough sample size to really have a lot of good conclusions sometimes. But yeah, that's been looked at. So, but yeah, more stress, lack of food, life is hard as a deer, you're running around and your immune system's down. That's seriously going to affect your ability to get disease or not.
Yeah, that was interesting to me.
Consistency. That's what you aim for with every practice shot. So when you're out in the field, you get that same consistency every shot. With Carlson's choke tubes, consistency is what you'll get. Our choke tubes are long-lasting, high quality, and made right here in the USA. Carlson's choke tubes, pattern tested, hunter approved. Find out more at choketube.com.
Are you anxious to get going? Knowing that the clock is ticking and time truly is the most precious commodity in the world? Then you, my friend, are in good company.
I guess where I'm like still where I keep going back to is that 100% of them die or would die because if they're hunted or hit by a car.
Yeah, predated.
When we look at Michigan, for instance, we had I think it was all but 6 hunting areas were down as far as harvest rates go. Last year, we had over 60,000 automobile accidents with deer, which stop and think about that.
It's the suicide thing.
Yeah.
They're giving up.
But 60,000, I don't know how many of them had Swiss cheese for brain, but, you know.
That's a good question.
It is. But 60,000 automobile accidents, and I think the harvest rate was well over 30,000 less deer were harvested last year. I have made the case, without a degree, that I believe that the mild winters mixed with lack of hunting success over the last few years, mixed with people losing interest, which is something we worried about. Now, the Michigan DNR saw a spike in license purchases for
COVID.
Exactly. And I think that has to be acknowledged. I think that because the bait ban went into place in 2019, I think, and we saw at the exact same time a spike in interest in hunting. And it's kind of like how you were saying, like with control groups, right? You have to kind of look at, not control groups, but you have to look at so many different variables. My worry was that the baiting, taking it away, would cause people to lose interest in hunting. In Michigan, this is very normal, probably in Minnesota as well. We have something where you've got a lot of guys that make up the license sales only hunt maybe 4 or 5 days a year. They get the November 15th holiday. They maybe take a long weekend or something like that. They go up. They do whatever they can to make their property as attractive. Because a lot of people, they got their 10 or 20 acres to hunt. I mean, it's a story, you know, in Michigan, that's kind of how it works.
If they have it at all.
Sure. So that is kind of like that's kind of like a pastime. On top of that, and I'm not saying whether I'm for or against any of this, especially antler point restrictions. I'm not saying whether I'm for or against, but you have an area like where we hunt, there's antler point restrictions, there's no baiting, and you've got these people that only have 3 or 4 days to hunt, and the interest levels are going down. Now, I'm hearing that by talking to thousands of people a year. You know, I'm around the campfires, I'm interacting with these people, I'm hearing these stories, and I'm worried about the participation. And then when I look at the numbers and I see that we harvested so many less deer last year because that COVID pop is going away. So my fear is that overpopulation and these mild winters, the last 2 that we've had, are going to lead the charge in spread of most diseases. Those are I see those as being 2 of the biggest, if not the biggest threats. To disease spread. Would you agree? Like seeing that in the field, you're like, crap, we need a good winter. Like, are you?
A good winter being a cold winter. I mean, I think sometimes.
Ice fishing.
Yeah. Well, better ice for that would be great too. I think sometimes people forget that whitetail deer, they're going to die eventually. And
especially if I'm around.
Well, hopefully that way.
Yeah.
That's like the best way for them to
Isn't
die,
it?
probably.
Yeah.
You know,
quick,
like
clean, painless.
Yes, meat goes to good use. Awesome. I don't want to have it die from a disease. I certainly don't. Or a car. Like that's not great.
No.
old age where they're competing with a lot of other deer and they're starving to death, I don't want to see that either. So, but they will die, and there's lots of food in Michigan and nice, good climate happening and less pressure and less removal through mortality from that population, then just it's a numbers game. Your numbers will go up.
Right.
And we don't have that pressure on them. We don't have large predators. There's not a lot of other things besides hunters taking out a lot of deer. So yeah, deer densities will go up, and some diseases, not all, that are sort of density dependent, where the more animals are together contacting each other a lot, the more transmission spreads. Because again, EHD isn't quite like that, because you have to have the insect there, which changes the dynamic.
No
a little.
seamies.
Yeah,
they are the worst in Florida. We got them in the Everglades. Oh my goodness,
tiny, and they bite you up. It's terrible.
Yeah.
But again, deer density going up. Deer are generally not food limited in the Lower Peninsula in most places.
Right. Especially in the breadbasket in the southwest area.
This is awesome deer habitat. It really is. So, you don't have to put down bait, because there's a soybean field right there and some sorghum and an apple tree and this great, white oak.
Right. I think my concern with the bait, though, is the whole northern part. Not the UP, because obviously they can bait. But like where I hunt in Mesik, it isn't really like that.
Yeah.
For us up there.
Yeah. Well, and I think
really
you mentioned something about expectations too. And I think that's a challenge, right? Like you get fewer folks going out for not a lot of time, because there's so many different constraints on our time, and everybody wants your time right now, and you getting your time out in your deer stand or whatever is shorter and shorter, and you still have this expectation to bring home like a sweet buck,
Yeah, well, that was the best I've ever gotten. So I don't want to act like I do that often.
Well, but like, you know what I mean, though? Like, there's this expectation that, and if I don't get this awesome trophy buck, then, the deer hunting here is terrible. That's tough. That's a real tough thing to deal with. And yeah, so
I can understand that point. I think the other part of that, though, where I feel, though, is we have to look at the funding that pays for the folks that do all this.
Yeah.
And the fact of the matter is a giant portion of the funding comes from the sale of deer hunt, that combination license that the guys get to go out and our representation of what I'm saying. And if it would be a tough case to make, to be like, you got to lower your expectations of getting deer and still go do it.
Yeah.
That's a tough sell.
Totally. And we need hunters to keep that pressure on.
Exact. And the expectation almost, in my opinion, not to counter you, but should be there simply because we harvested 30,000 less last year.
Yeah.
Plus,
they are out there. I mean, these deer are out there.
Yeah.
And I guess my point is maybe like the deer are out there. A lot of folks, if they're going to go get a deer in that 4 days, they might just want to take one buck. And that's not changing your population that much. Right? We need folks to shoot like 4 and like 3 of them be does, right?
I have a hypothesis on this, and I think you'll nerd out on it a little bit. This is my opinion. I grew up deer hunting with my dad, and we have that deer camp that I was talking about. Jeffrey goes there too. We've been best friends since we were 5. Always do hunting together. And the first couple of years that I was up there, I was just a kid, 12 years old or whatever. And I got a deer my first morning, and it was a 3-point, and it was the most magical moment of my life. You know what I mean? Awesome. That's my first deer. And that's from that moment on, I was like, well, this is what I'm going to do. And then boy, did I run with that. But
yes, well done.
Thank you. But going back to that, I grew up in the environment at that deer camp where it was like, you do not shoot does. You do not shoot does.
That was a culture.
And I have a hypothesis on where that come from. Is in the 1920s and 30s when we almost didn't have any whitetail deer and the populations were so low, it got instilled that you do not shoot does because you absolutely don't want to take out why shoot the golden goose that's going to lay the egg, right?
Yep.
And the thing is like we have this, people are living longer. So that's only one grandpa ago. There's still some grandpas running around right now that still had that mentality when they lived in the 1920s and 30s that
they see a doe and they see like a future button buck that's going to be the next big shooter.
Exactly. Exactly. So they taught their kids that. Well, their kids are just our dads.
Yeah.
So it's like we're the first generation in Michigan where we're like, hey, now we gotta be popping some does.
Seen a lot of doe.
Yeah, I know. And I remember it too. I remember a text from my dad. I said, I have the biggest doe ever in front of me right now. I want to shoot it. And he sent a text, something like, no, son. He's like, that doe is what's going to create your buck in the future, or something like that. And he said it loving, and that was what his dad taught him. And that's what the whole deer camp believed. And then I like came up one year. I'm like, I got a case to make with all of you. I'm like,
Well, good for you.
yeah. And I was like, this is the real situation.
Yeah.
And we have shifted. And now it would be like if you got a doe at deer camp when I first started, you left it in the truck. You didn't put it near the buck pole.
Yeah.
That's where the bucks go. If you did something dirty, you keep it in your truck. That's what the mentality.
Honestly, I mean, before EHD hit in 2012 in some of the local areas around here, because I worked with some local sportsmen's group like the Maple River Deer Co-op folks and others. They were doing doe they were trying to get the biggest doe. You know, they were having a doe competition.
Nice. No,
to,
that's
bring
smart.
That culture back. And you know, a lot of the QDMA, now called NDA, you know, mentality has like there is a doe with a buck in that icon picture, right? Because it's about keeping healthy, sustainable populations that aren't over competing for food, because like when those deer densities go up that high, you're not going to have as quality of animal,
right?
I mean, so
I think it's the educating too, is like the deer, like you said, the densities are so high. It reminds me of like a pond. If you had a pond and you released nothing but bluegills in there over a certain amount of year period, you would just have a bunch of little itty bitty bluegills running around.
Yep.
You need the predators in there so that the littler ones can have more food to survive and that sort of thing. So that's
exactly the same thing. Exactly the same thing. So yeah, I think you know, and as winters are warmer and there's more good habitat, whitetail deer are only going to do better. You know, they're only going to do better. So, you know, in terms of total numbers,
nature's reaction to that is the same: disease spread.
That's often the case. You know, you just have so many high density areas and deer in one spot, and we sometimes characterize it as a biological carrying capacity, and there's also a social carrying capacity. So generally speaking, I'd say deer, like in the Lower Peninsula, they aren't over maybe the biological carrying capacity, because that biological carrying capacity just means like how much food does it take to have this many deer out there. And they can really go a long way and, you know, get really high before they really crash. And you don't want that crash, right?
Right.
That would be bad.
We're worried about that with the snow geese right now.
Yeah. So, but social carrying capacity is often sometimes your more limiting factor, because you guys might want to have these deer and growing up in some places too, but then you're also dealing with more vehicle collisions and complaints from farmers and landowners.
You can't grow a flower.
No, I can't.
I live in DeWitt, and it's there's a lot of deer. I can't grow much, so but that, you know, that's all right. So there's a lot of different factors. There's a lot of really good important reasons, like economically, ecologically, for the health of the deer, for people's sake, to keep deer numbers lower, and that's just harder and harder to do,
especially with the losing of the interest. And and that's where my priority comes in, is like, I'm not a scientist. I have a lot of experience with deer, just because I'm always in the woods. But my interactions with people and that sort of thing is hoping to get more people involved in purchasing hunting and fishing licenses, getting out in the outdoors, harvesting this year's surplus to make room for next year's fawns. Yeah, there's always going to be more deer, but there's not going to be more habitat and food and that sort of thing. And obviously the disease spread is a big one too. I want to go into your main expertise as far as disease goes, but kind of as a transition to that, what is the abbreviation for it?
EHD.
EHD.
Yep.
TB and CWD. Looking at those three.
EHD's blue tongue?
Yeah, same.
Yeah,
yep. Well,
okay.
So they're like clinically indistinguishable if you saw them in a deer and whatnot, but they are different viruses.
Okay.
So,
but
they're really similar.
All right.
So,
Sorry.
No, it's a great question. I didn't know that. And I didn't know that a midge is also those darn things that were killing us in the 10,000 Islands. So that's another thing I learned today. But if you're a deer hunter in Michigan, and I'm going to go up for November 14th or November 15th, and I shoot a deer, and now I've heard this podcast, and I'm like, well, sure, I got to kind of look this deer over. What am I looking for? How do I protect myself?
For EHD?
For any of them.
Oh, gosh.
Like, I'm going to eat this deer. What do I need to be on the lookout for?
Just don't.
No, eat the deer. Yeah, and CWD is one I'm very, very familiar with too. And TB, I really nerded out for 4.5 years on EHD. But,
Yeah.
So for a lot of these, they aren't zoonotic, but you also don't want to be the first one to like have a bad experience. So TB is going to be different than CWD, and EHD is really not an issue. Like
Okay.
you can eat the meat from a deer that was infected with and survived EHD and be fine.
So the big fear of them is that they're going to die.
Yeah. So the big issue
Like
with
you're going to spread it and have a bunch die.
yeah. So EHD is it's really acute, so that it
Adorable.
it is so cute, and it is acute as in it acts really quickly. It's very like symptomatic, and these animals get clinical, and either they go from like maybe they're gonna be sick, and some make it, and they get like
So they
rough.
can survive that.
They
Okay.
can get almost lifelong immunity.
Just give them some
If-
water.
Yeah, water, and then they I mean, just like any virus, like you get a cold, you get COVID, whatever, you have some immunity after that.
Mhm.
Deer get immunity from EHD virus.
Okay.
And there's different serotypes. We usually have EHDV 1, 2, or 6 in Michigan. And then there's blue tongue. And there's different serotypes of blue tongue too. So, they get through it, sometimes you see in the hunt, and your deer might have sloughed hooves. So that means like it's a hemorrhagic disease. So again, like they're internally bleeding, right? And there's like, it's not nice, but if they get through it though, one of the signs is you kind of like see this like sloughing of the hoof, or like there's like kind of a line on their hoof. I wish I had a picture of it with me, but like where it kind of looks like normal healthy growth versus like kind of a jacked up hoof.
Yeah.
So,
like his foot.
yeah.
No, just yeah.
So yeah. So that's one thing you could look for EHD,
Okay.
and that would mean that that animal got through it. A lot of times we do what's called serosurvey. So that means we're looking at blood serum from hunter harvested deer, or deer that are maybe sick, and we can get an actual sample for them. And we can look at antibodies in serum. So there's the red blood cells and the white blood cells, and like kind of the stuff that's in between the red blood cells and white blood cells. That serum is where we can detect antibodies to EHDV.
Okay.
So that's another thing we can look at. We've done a bit of that. And then, if a lot of times, if it's actually going to kill that deer, EHD, that is, it will not make it to the hunting season.
Okay.
But if it's
because
dead
of
and
when
dying,
it gets it?
because it died so fast.
Okay.
And by the time hunting seasons come around, like usually, at least in Michigan, EHD outbreaks have slowed down. That's because the frost basically kills the midge,
Okay.
and that shuts down the outbreak.
Okay.
And
So
you really can't see them.
Yeah.
yeah. Okay. So that makes a little bit of sense
So
then.
it's like a hot, dry, like this time of the summer, early fall, this is like classic EHD outbreak time.
So I mentioned the Everglades and the 10,000 Islands as far as like dealing with the no-see-ums. There's so many there. So is this a disease that's more prevalent in states that have way more midges? Or is it just luck of the draw where it ends up?
No, there's a real pattern to it. So it's what we call endemic in the southeastern U.S. Like you could go test deer in Georgia or Texas or wherever, and most will have antibodies to EHD virus.
So they dealt with it at some point.
They've dealt with it at some point. It's moving further north. So like in Kentucky, Indiana, Missouri, that's more spotty, but a lot of them have had it, but more spotty outbreaks. And up here, it's like incursive, or like you get these big epizootics. And then there's a lot of deer that are susceptible to it because they haven't had any immunity, because there isn't like a regular exposure to it.
Do we know how many in Michigan have gotten it?
I think so. Michigan DNR informally said roughly 1,300 reports. Last time I checked with them, maybe last week. It's not the 2012 15,000 deer that they reported, or nearly 15,000, but there's a pretty hot outbreak in the southwest part of the state right now.
Okay.
Again, it's fast, it can kill these guys pretty quick.
Do you think part of that is the population being higher? Or midges just making the trek up north?
It's all you need the virus there. This is again why I think diseases are kind of cool, because it's like you need a perfect storm. It's like this little puzzle that all has to come together.
You would love I Am Legend. No, I'm just kidding. It's a good movie.
I think I've seen it.
Yeah, Will Smith.
Oh yeah, I've seen that.
It's supposed to make a second one, but AJ isn't buying it. I think it is true.
No.
So you need the midge there, and there's lots of midge species, right? Not all those midge species that were like biting you up in Florida. We're the ones that vector the virus. So
Can you imagine being named Midge with all this going on?
midge. Yeah,
That's a
so
rough
you
name.
need all those things. Oops, sorry.
She wants to see the manager for sure, but the Midge.
Midge.
Can immunity be passed down?
Yeah, actually, that's a good question. It's only one way though, so it's through adult female lactating, feeding her fawn. She can have antibodies in her milk, and she'll transmit that immunity through the milk to her fawn. But as soon as that fawn is done nursing and is like eating other forage, that immunity is lost.
Why?
Oh,
Because it
Wow.
only can get it through the milk, the antibodies. It's like getting those antibodies, and so that's like 16 weeks usually for a fawn.
So it never makes
so it's
its own.
it's protected while
Well,
breastfeeding,
yeah.
and then
No,
after
while
that,
nursing.
it's got
You gotta figure it out.
yeah.
And then
okay.
it's on its own. So
So
yeah, you can get fawns, and like you could get fawns this season that are getting it still. but-
Okay.
if you had to rank the scare, CWD, EHD, and TB, how would you rank them?
Oh, a scare for who? The deer or the people?
I would say the hunters. I'd say for me.
Okay. Man, TB is nasty too, but it's kind of like slow fire.
Can you get TB from eating a deer with it?
Yeah, TB is more scary for you because it's more clearly zoonotic.
Yeah.
For the hunting community, CWD is scary because there's just these long-term. It's not going to affect us today directly. It's going to affect our grandkids.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to affect future generations of a healthy white-tailed deer herd.
Well, I also read a thing that there's potential for CWD to be passed to monkeys.
There's
But that's not.
well,
that's
so
kinda close.
well, so okay, that is worrisome, and that is where that's a challenge study on what they would call a model species, a macaque. I think was some of this research there. It hasn't all been published and finalized yet, but there's a lot of different efforts in the lab and in clinical trials and such to see different species and like, okay, can I give it to a pig? Can I give it to a hamster? Right? How close can we get to a human form? Right? And so there has been some indications of some concern with macaques being infected by eating infectious meat and some brain inoculation. And again, like the infectious meat is way more likely than you're not going to be really worrying about brain inoculation, but it's just to demonstrate what's possible sometimes in the clinical setting so you can dig in further down the road.
Okay.
But
My main concern with that is he's not here to defend himself, but AJ kind of looks like a macaque. So I don't know.
You know what's funny? I didn't know those things existed, and I thought it was a joke that you were making the other day. And now I can't run into a conversation where they don't come up.
macaques?
Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. I pronounced it different. I'll be honest.
I mean, that's fine.
You're making a fool of yourself.
I only read it for a while, so I didn't know.
Yeah.
But yeah, no. So for hunters,
Scary diseases, yeah. I would say one of my favorite diseases, though, is EHD because it's really interesting.
yeah,
Humans can't
Yeah.
get that one, right?
No, humans can't get it, so that's
and they're
a
not
win.
during hunting season, anyways.
Yeah, that's a win. And
She's
then
like, it still matters. No, I agree.
I know. Well, actually, so that's the thing. It is challenging because you can't really do a lot when you have EHD in an area. Like I think there might have been some work on some vaccine because it's a virus. You could make a vaccine for it for like some captive cervid industry use, but I'd have to check on how that's going. But for free ranging deer, it's really hard to do much about. A lot of my research was, okay, what is the impact at a population level and how spatially spread was that? Is it, if it's in, St. Joe County, is it across the whole county or is it just this little sliver where that river system was? And what I found was basically you get outside of a deer home range, so 3 miles, let's say, away from where that really bad, and where I was looking was Maple River corridor, and then I was comparing that up to the Cass River corridor up in the Thumb.
Yep.
Because they're kind of similar systems with ag on either side and all these things, and similar otherwise. With
Thumb's like just straight ag up there.
a lot of ag.
Yeah.
But again, around that river corridor, great midge habitat, right? And more riparian, more muddy. They're mud obligates. They need mud to have their life cycle. So just, a few miles away from that river corridor, there was very little impact on the deer population. So it's spatially very surgical. It's narrow, it's not affecting everything everywhere. You could have a buddy who saw 20 dead deer here and it's like the apocalypse on their land.
30 miles away, it's nothing.
I mean, 5 miles away, it's nothing.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, so it's very dependent on, deer home range and movement, and then also where that midge habitat is.
It's kind of like there's always one guy in the group that mosquitoes are like, you're my...
Yeah.
Yeah. My dad's that guy. I sit by him outside by the campfire because he's going to attract them all and they're going to go to him.
He's their filet mignon.
Yeah.
That's Jenna too.
He's O negative.
She gets destroyed.
He's O negative. I have a hypothesis it's the blood type.
Oh, yeah.
I can smell it.
Yeah.
With their big, long noses.
That they're known for. So, go ahead, Ryan.
I was going to ask, I don't know if you can or can't answer this question, but concerning CWD, do you think, because you're talking about like the long-term effects of what this could do, in your opinion, do you think that more population control or less population control is the route? Which would be the better way to go?
I mean, I think if you
more, right?
Well, if you just step back and let it all run its course, you're going to see a lot more EHD. And we can look at landscapes that have had it on the landscape longer. Like there's mule deer populations now in Colorado and Wyoming that are, declining because of so much EHD. Like EHD mortality specifically is like a significant part of the mortality for these herds. Arkansas has a lot, like very high prevalence rates there. I'm worried about Arkansas. I'm worried about some places in Wisconsin, really high prevalence rates. We aren't there yet. And again, it's slow moving, but yeah.
Okay. That's fair. I guess for a summary, I know I kind of asked this and you kind of said it, but I want to hone in on it one more time before we wrap up, is for Michigan hunters, CWD, what is their concern? Should they be getting their deer tested?
Oh, yeah.
So, what should a hunter do? Hey, I had a deer come in, seemed fine, but I just want to get them checked out.
Yeah. So I would say it's always great to voluntarily get your deer tested. If you have a little flexibility and you can let that meat hang in a cooler and it's not too hot outside or whatever, that's awesome. Please do that. It's great. Now, it's not like an FDA food safety test, right? And the DNR can only do so much. So there's a few new kits out there and things online that I would encourage folks to look into. Michigan DNR, I think, has a site where if you want to get a test done, it provides you a couple different paths to figure out how you might do that as a hunter. So I encourage folks to do that. Again, Michigan DNR, like for disease surveillance, knowing what they're dealing with, they've got their surveillance plan. They're like checking where they need to be looking for understanding the level of CWD out there. So again, I'd go and see the options that are there and get it tested if you can. And then, Michigan DNR is also doing surveillance for tuberculosis. So if you're in a tuberculosis area or you're in a CWD area, I'd much more likely get my deer tested.
I feel like the TB especially.
Yeah, for sure. That's a zoonotic disease. I mean, you can get that. So that's a scary one. And you're looking for little white nodules in the carcass, like along the rib cage and such. If I saw little white nodules, like little pearls kind of in the chest cavity, I would get out of there.
Yeah.
Wouldn't even go near it.
Nope.
Okay.
That's terrifying.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Okay.
I mean, wear gloves. It's tough. I say that, and you'll see a picture of me with my deer with no gloves on, and it's hard to keep all that together when you're in the field. But
no, I always think too is like, oh, that's probably not how I'm gonna go.
Hasn't happened yet.
Yeah.
Grizzly bear.
Before we go, I've got a bit of a challenge for you.
She's not arm
Case
wrestling
study,
you.
is that the right term? I think.
Sure.
I had a deer in my backyard. I've got a small herd that goes through my backyard.
Okay.
And there were 2 doe and there were 3 fawn.
Okay.
So I assume they're kind of all going together. Maybe one
family group. Yeah.
One is with this one, 2 is with this one, whatever. Months, that's all I see. And then out of nowhere, there's just one extra fawn, and it's smaller than the other ones.
What time of year was this?
3 weeks ago.
Okay.
Still got its spots. The other ones are starting to fade. They're looking more just regular brown. And then 3 weeks ago, I'm in my backyard, and I just find that deer, the fawn, dead in the backyard.
Huh.
The new little
The
girl.
new little one, and it wasn't molested by predators.
Okay.
All it had, and I found it because of crows that were picking out its eyes.
That would be one to report to the DNR, maybe.
I did.
Oh, good.
So it had that, and then something had come in and eat out its
Yeah.
back end some.
Yep,
So just
that
scavengers
happens,
at that
yep.
point.
You said it wasn't molested.
Yeah.
Sounds not
So
good for
I
that
called the
deer.
DNR. They said, okay, we'll have someone reach out to you within, a couple days. Feel free to leave it there,
Yep.
or depending if you have to get rid of it, put it in a garbage bag and throw it away with your regular garbage. So I waited. That was on a Friday. They were supposed to call me on a Monday. They never did.
Oh,
And then when I went back out there on the Monday to check on it was gone.
yeah. Something
Gone?
ate it up.
Gone.
Yeah.
So something came and grabbed it.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I want to know if just looking at the picture, if you'd be able to tell me anything about how it potentially went.
I would be happy to look at the picture, but I probably won't tell you how it went.
That's pretty unfair. Yeah.
So
I'm curious because I don't know what happened to it.
We're not judging her on it.
My
No,
brain
no, of course
is like, what are you nearby that could have caused trauma, like a car,
Mhm.
His
or
wife.
could have caused, like, do you have like a swamp or a muddy area near you? Could it have
And a
been
creek?
EHD? Creeks?
And a
Yeah.
pond.
Creeks will do
It
it.
was right by the creek
What
too.
county do you live in?
I live in Macomb County.
Okay, maybe.
His
Maybe.
address
Yeah.
is.
So there's the.
Oh gosh, and it's been a bit
Yeah.
scavenged on.
Mm-hmm.
That's a young deer. I mean,
Yeah.
this time of year, was it near water at all? Like
It was
by the creek?
right by the creek. Yeah.
That would be a EHD suspect to me.
Yeah.
If you didn't see anything,
You got the
broken.
pond there too.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
I mean,
do have a
'cause-
pond there.
So what? We don't see a lot of CWD in that young of deer because CWD, like I said, that
You're still getting the
The-
antibodies from the mom.
not for CWD.
Oh, CWD. Sorry.
No antibodies. That one's a terrible
yeah.
one, right? And but the incubation time is so slow with that one that 6-month-old
Is that
animal.
the tongue I'm looking at?
So
Is it
hemorrhagic
really?
disease, yeah, it's gonna look like it can have like a purplish looking
Okay.
tongue because there's all that hemorrhaging internally. So I would say EHD suspect of those
Okay.
three.
Okay.
We'll
But,
never know
I mean,
now.
that-
'cause
But
not
maybe
long
not.
ago.
But you'd be
Yeah.
like, let's dig into that and figure
Yeah,
out.
you could take the spleen out. You can
Yeah.
send that in. Call me. I don't know.
Yeah.
Like that's
Some-
that's one.
Someone ate it already, so
Yeah.
I was curious and I was gonna, but
Yeah.
it was.
Well,
gone.
I'm glad you called the DNR. And honestly, calling the DNR, like that's there's a I think Eyes in the Field report
Mhm.
that you can do, and that's the best
They
way
had
to go.
me map where it was, how close it was to water.
Yes,
all
that's
sorts of
because they're
stuff.
thinking EHD too
Yeah.
right now. Because again, you're looking at risk factors, you're weighing a lot of different variables on the landscape, and then sort of trying to make your best guess. And then you take that with your best guess and figure it out exactly by doing the diagnostics in a lab, figuring out what pathogen actually killed it, if that was the thing. So,
Well, lastly, let me say thanks for coming in because your expertise is awesome. Is there anything that you feel like we've missed on that you're like, you should have asked me this?
oh gosh, well, I could talk about EHD a lot.
Yeah.
And that one is going on right now, so I think people need to be aware of it. I think a lot of questions come up of like, what can I do about it? And that's challenging, I realize, but just being aware that they're out there and reporting them is really helpful so that we can, whenever we can better characterize a disease outbreak, helps us out a lot because that informs us for the next year and the next year and the next year. That information is helpful. It helps us understand what to expect in the field that year, like when we're going hunting or whatever. So I would encourage that. That disease system, I don't have a crystal ball, but there's a few risk factors that I would say we were ready for it. We're kind of due because we had a pretty wet spring and a warm, wet spring in July, and then a fairly dry August, and like the last month has been quite dry.
Insanely dry. We were just in the UP and we couldn't believe how dry it was.
That is exactly the
We were
formula.
walking in swamps and not getting even damp.
Yep.
Dust.
So
Yeah.
I have done research and analyzed data from West Virginia, from Michigan, from across the U.S., and that combination of factors often creates higher probability of an EHD outbreak. So just things to think about in the future.
Even
But-
last weekend near Grayling was like that, almost identical to the UP.
It's
Yeah.
insane.
yeah.
I have one more
Yeah.
question. Concerning all this information, where can the average person go to like access this information or
Yeah.
resources and kind of learn about it? Because it seems like a lot of times the way outdoorsmen are learning stuff is through like magazine articles
Yeah.
and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So where can they go see like actual studies?
That's a great question. I appreciate that because I mean, that's really good stuff. And there's so many really good scientists who are trying to like reduce all the variables and like really narrow down what's going on. So I will say Michigan DNR does have a lot of good web pages on their site on EHD, where it's happening, CWD, TB, all that. There's also the National Wildlife Health Center through USGS has a really good site, and so does the Southeastern Cooperative Wildlife Disease Study, SQUIDIS, out of University of Georgia. They're actually the longest standing like wildlife disease like research group. I think I'm probably gonna piss somebody off by saying that I'm forgetting about, but
Always, right?
Yeah, but they are one of the longest
Welcome to our
standing.
world.
I know, and they actually got their initial funding through EHD in Georgia back quite a while ago, and they've got really good like info on all of these different diseases too. So again, National Wildlife Health Center out of USGS, you could Google that. SQUIDIS out of UGA, you could Google that. Michigan DNR. I try to post some stuff on my, it's probably not up to date enough on my website these days, but, and then, National Deer Association has some good articles on EHD. I talked to Lindsay Thomas not too long ago about that one. So, yeah, those are some good starts.
I appreciate your work, and also that you're a hunter too. And I kind of started this conversation with, a lot of times there's two sides to this stuff, as far as, not necessarily right and wrong, but like two different opinions. And you guys, and I say you guys meaning like the science folks doing the tests and stuff like that, it seems like you guys get attacked a lot, and I guess that would be the way to say it.
Yeah.
And for me, it's like the other side, because I find myself trying to be in the middle and bring everybody together. And I think that's what needs to happen, because the hunters fund everything. The hunters are the ones that are harvesting the resource that we're all working to protect. The deer are a resource. Mm-hmm. Resource, meaning a renewable resource that we harvest and we collect and we eat. And if something is truly wrong, or something that could impact that deer herd, the same way that we would protect we've got no problem going out and hunting coyotes to protect the deer. We should have no problem also looking at the science that matters that may impact the deer herd. In the same sense, I think that the hunters' voices need to be heard in what they see, and I think that the scientific community's voices need to be heard in what they see, and I think together it would be a powerful force, and I think you represent that because you are a hunter and you do the science. And I think that that's important, because the whole goal is that we can harvest a resource and feed our families with clean meat, get hours of recreation in the field with our families, and do all those things. So I've tried to remain somewhat unopinionated on it, in the sense of learning from you, and I hope that I did that. And I think you did a great job of conveying the information that you're seeing, because at the end of the day, you like go into work and you see it, so you're like, just listen, look at, and it's,
and we don't know everything, and anecdotes are anecdotes, but I'm listening to those things, like, and then it helps you get a good idea of a research question, like, we don't really know this. We have guesses. There's lots of guesses. Let's figure it out. Let's figure out what it really is.
Sure.
But then we need funding for research so that we can
always
do it. And I'm not, if I study CWD or EHD, or I just count deer and I'm teaching classes, I'm doing everything else at the university, that's not changing my life.
Right.
It's not a motivation to study CWD more than something else for me. But I think they're important questions that there's still a lot of unanswered pieces too. So anything we can do to nudge that forward, I think is important.
I would agree too. And I think that in general, when on both sides, I think there's a lot of distrust in government stuff right now too. So anytime there's any kind of government involvement, there's certain sides that'll be like, yes, they must be right, and there's sides that they must be wrong.
Yeah.
And that creates difficulty too. But
strictly depending on who it favors.
Yeah. You want to know the outcome.
Well, and if I went, here's the facts. If I went online right now and Googled TB or Googled CWD, depending on who did the research, I'm going to get different information. And that becomes weird in the sense of like, well, then who do I trust? So I guess we're really happy to have you on to kind of come in and talk about this, and also let hunters know that, they should still be going in the field. They should, if they're going to harvest a deer, when they gut them, they should be looking at the organs, and they should be looking at the rib cage, and they should be looking for like white nodules, especially if they're in the TB area. It's not very likely you'll run into that because of what the infection
Hopefully
rate.
not.
Yeah. But if you do, step away from it immediately.
Call the DNR.
Yep. Number 2, as far as chronic wasting disease goes, there's testing facilities that people can take them to, and they should. Although there's no sign that it could jump to a human as of now. So, I hope and believe that will continue to be the case. And then the third one probably won't affect you during hunting season because
Correct.
they would have already.
It might have very locally reduced your deer numbers, and that would be a bummer. But those deer populations will rebound if they're not food limited, and again, you can eat the meat just fine.
But you're figuring it out, so I hopefully we'll have a way to
working on it
to knock that down in the future. But
yeah.
So go out into the field. At the end of the day, the odds of you harvesting a deer in Michigan that is going to be harmful to you is very, 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 very minor.
Yeah.
And if you want to go and see how meat is processed at other places or see how your food is created by other big corporations, then you'll find that the deer is probably still the healthiest choice that you could ever run into.
Yes. Great protein source.
Yes, absolutely. So thank you so much for tuning in to the Greenway Outdoors podcast. If you're watching this podcast, then good for you. You're watching it on Waypoint or you're watching it on YouTube. But if you're only listening to it, go check it out on those platforms so you can actually see some of the images and stuff that Jeff edited into this while you were talking about it. I'm sure we'll be able to get those pictures up and some of that cool stuff too. So if there's anything you need to send them, please do. The second season of the Greenway Outdoors on the History Channel is going to be coming out October 19th. We have a premiere party on October 12th in Auburn Hills, Michigan at Bass Pro Shops. Great wild game dinner, live music by the Gasoline Gypsies, and you get to see 2 episodes of the Greenway Outdoors TV show on the big screen at AMC Theaters. So we're excited to see all of you there. Thanks so much for tuning in, and stay green.